Yeah, I wanted to ask Maria what she thought about hope, about creating hope, because it's also something that Kamala Harris talks about. It's always the first on her list. What Maria thinks about hope, and I'll look at questions while Maria.
I think Carlos is absolutely right. I mean, it's at a point where you're completely desperate. And I think that a lot of what Carlos was talking about in terms of kind of the institutional dismantling of democracy and the things that you're living through right now, Carlos, feel very reminiscent of something that was happening here in this country. To me, it's the role of the journalist, right, to continue to try to give context to all of this. But it's just interesting because when I went back to El Salvador in the year 2000, and just kind of this sense that there wasn't hope then, right? And now it's 20 years later and it's like, and now there's no hope now. It's quite distressing. Quite distressing, but yeah. And the thing is that there's a real question about hope, hope in this country, Carlos, and certainly in terms of immigration and like reframing. I don't know. I feel hopeless a lot of the time in terms of this policy, immigration here in the United States.
One question is about censorship, and I wanted to ask Kate a little bit about whether she thought all of the perversions or distortions, I should say, of amnesty policy is a violation of international law. And that might lead a little bit to censorship. I mean, is that something we as journalists can say? And then certainly Carlos could talk about censorship, but maybe we can start with Kate about this question of international law and the amnesty policies of the last administration.
So, can you say that question maybe one more time? I'm trying to figure out where to start. I think you're muted.
That might be a little out of left field, but in all of these distortions of the amnesty policy that you've talked about, I just wonder if it's not a violation of international law. That, I mean, doesn't a country have an obligation to make amnesty available if to countries that are amnesty? I'm sorry. I say asylum. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Asylum. Sorry.
No, I think that helps.
That's a big difference.
Autism and Alzheimer's and I'm sorry, asylum policies.
Yes, we absolutely have obligations under international law. We also have obligations under our own laws that were written based on those treaties that we signed, right? And so, those things exist, are facts. And the debate about whether any particular rule that's put in place to implement those laws or supposedly implement those laws by one administration or another, and sort of the legal debate about that, we cover as best we can, and we see what happens when different judges make those decisions. But the fact that we are obligated, if somebody can show us that they are being persecuted or will likely be persecuted, being sent back to their country because of one of five things, their nationality, their political opinion, their religion, their race, or their membership in a social group, which the simplest example that I usually give is somebody who's part of the LGBTQ identifying community. You can think about that as a social group. If someone can demonstrate that to us, then we are required under law to let them stay here. Mm-hmm. And it gets very in the weeds about what that staying here can look like and what the requirements are for sort of different versions of being able to stay here. And we do this differently from most other countries in the world and how their screening systems are set up. So when you look at whether or not somebody actually gets asylum, which when you get that version of protection, you can get a green card, you can eventually become a US citizen. That is technically a discretionary offering. And so on top of proving all of these things, you also have to demonstrate to the judge that you have quote unquote good moral character. And I'm sorry if I'm getting too in the weeds on this, but this is where I get very nerdy and very interested in how things operate. But even for people who don't demonstrate that they have good moral character, if they can show that they are really likely to be harmed, we still have to protect them. And we use a different path called withholding of removal, which basically means that they are never asked to leave the country. If they have that path, they have to continuously renew work permits. So they're always paying to get a new work permit. They cannot get a green card. They cannot become a US citizen through just having that path, but they are protected. They are allowed to be here. And so if it is a life and death question, you know, they're offered that chance at life. But getting to that point is very complicated, and our system has not done a great job of actually filtering for who qualifies for those things. And I think I've probably talked way too much in the weeds of a question that maybe wasn't meant to go quite that far.
But the whole question to me, the whole question of protection, I think it's like what we know, right? Because our colleagues, and I've been documenting this, is that the United States knows that when they are displacing people, deporting them, returning them, or whatever term you want to use, that they are putting them into very highly dangerous places, whether it's Matamoros. I'm not so familiar with Tijuana, but Matamoros, Juarez, Tapachula, all of these places, which everybody knows they are high crime areas, and they are specifically targeting people who look like refugees, who present as refugees. So this whole notion of the United States is supposed to offer protection, it's like, I don't even know what that term means. And that's why it's such a sad case to see the Biden administration, because he should know better. He knows everything that we're talking about and then some. And so it means he has a complete lack of backbone. And you know, I mean, the first thing he could do actually is he could apologize. He was in the Senate in the 1980s, if I'm not mistaken. That means he knew everything that was happening then. He could apologize. He could say, for the role that my government has played, I want, that's not going to happen. But it is quite distressing, because we're seeing this movie over and over again.